Support for the Nocturnists comes from the California Medical Association.
At the Nocturnists, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
This is the Nocturnist Conversations. I'm Emily Silverman. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Meghan Rothenberger, an infectious disease doctor whose story we first heard live on stage at Intersections, a storytelling event produced by the Center for the Art of Medicine in Minneapolis in 2024 through our program, the Nocturnists Satellites. In this conversation, Meghan opens up about her adolescence, her struggle with disordered eating, and how her path through medicine helped her rediscover a sense of wonder and gratitude for the human body. We talk about the confusing and taboo messages around puberty, body image, and food, her experience in a restrictive eating disorder program, how studying anatomy and physiology reshaped her relationship with her body, the transformative power of pregnancy, and how her lived experience informs her empathy and care for patients today. Meghan is one of the most talented storytellers we've ever had the pleasure to feature on this show, so I hope you'll take a listen to her story and enjoy the conversation. Here's Meghan.
Roses are red, violets are black. Why is your chest as flat as your back? This lovely poem was written just for me. I'm 13 years old, in 7th grade. The poet is a boy named Tony. Now, rather than writing the poem on a piece of paper and handing it to me like a normal person, he decides to shout it from the chairlift at our local ski hill. I'm in the chair right behind him. He turns around his body to face me as he recites the poem. I can see his blue eyes. Even though it's 10 degrees and windy as hell, I'm wearing jeans, carefully tucked into my ski boots. I'm also wearing a mint green earband so my bangs won't get crushed. I'm trying so hard to fit in. After Tony recites the poem, he turns back around to face up the hill, so I have to stare at the back of his stupid hat the rest of the way. I feel sick to my stomach with shame and embarrassment, but also oddly like I deserve such treatment, because in reality, my chest is as flat as my back. This memory came to me because I've been thinking a lot recently about my relationship with my body. Maybe it's because my daughter is 10 and I think about her entering adolescence, or maybe it's because I finally started cleaning out my old room, a task I managed to avoid for over 30 years because I never felt quite ready to face whatever artifacts were left over from my teenage years. Regardless of the reason, I've spent many hours over the last few months trying to piece together the story of myself, my body, and where things went wrong. I go back to when I'm a little girl. As this little girl, my body is not separate from me. It is me. I trust it. I eat when I'm hungry. I rest when I'm tired. I swim and I dance and I ride my bike. But then in later elementary school, things start to change. I'm in 5th grade, Mrs. Klinkhammer's class. That's her real name. I look like a child, but there's a new girl in the class, and she looks like a woman. I cannot stop staring at her. My mind is like blown. Like, how can we be members of the same species at the same age? Like, it just doesn't even compute. And at some point, the boys and the girls are separated. And us girls look at this really creepy plastic pelvis model, and there's these fallopian tubes sprouting like mutant flowers from a pink uterus. And we learn about periods and breasts and pads and tampons, and I'm terrified. Like, this is gonna happen to me? And the worst part is, no one can tell me when. It's like I realize I'm living in a ticking time bomb that will at some point turn on me. It'll start to bleed, it'll get acne, and hair will grow in places other than my head. It's around this time that I have one of my usual play dates with my best horse friend. We do all things horse together. One of our favorite things to do is play with these like realistic plastic horse models called Breyer horses. So on this day, I bring my crate of Breyer horses over to her house. and we're sitting on the floor of her room. She's a little girl like me, like we're just kids. It feels so safe to be with her. And then right in the middle of an exciting horse scene that we're acting out, she pauses and she looks at me and she said, "Can I show you something?" And I say, "Sure," but I get this little pit of worry in my stomach because she looks so serious. And she stands up and she walks across her room to her wooden dresser and she opens the top drawer and she takes out this pink elastic band looking thing. And I say, "Is it a belt?" And she said, "No, it's a training bra." And I want to throw up all over the black and white horse that I hold in my hand. I feel so betrayed by my friend and then so confused as to why I feel that way. Over the next several years, my relationship with my body starts to shift. I start to think of it as separate from me, like a box that carries the real me around. It just seems easier that way, like my body's going to do what it's going to do, but I'm still here, the same old person I've always been. I have to wait a while for my body to change because I'm a very late bloomer. But when it finally does change, it is not good. And the place that I most notice just how bad it is in the shower. The shower I use has these ugly tan speckled tiles, and there's a drain in the center that big hairy spiders would sometimes scuttle out of. So I'm standing in the shower, letting the warm water run over my body, and I look down. You all know that really awful perspective of your body. So I'm looking down, and my body looks so different. My stomach is sort of out more than it used to be, and it looks sort of soft, and my thighs used to be really straight, and they're kind of curved. And then I look at my breasts, and they're so small, but they're still lopsided. This is really all I get? And then I try and move them around, and no matter how much I squeeze them together, there is no cleavage, nothing, none. And then with the greatest sense of horror, I look down and I see a single hair sprouting from the darkened skin around my left nipple. I want to die. At the mall with my friends, I stare longingly at the posters of the beautiful models plastered all over the Abercrombie & Fitch walls. I would do anything for their twiggy little thighs, their plump breasts, their flat stomachs. I would take just one of their boobs and divide it between mine, and I would be great. I buy the most padded bras I can find. I even have a bra that's called a water bra. Each cup has a little mini waterbed in it, so you get the right kind of jiggle. I feel so awkward and abnormal. I start restricting my eating when I'm around 15. I don't really know why. It just feels sort of good to starve my disappointing body a little. And I heard it in other ways too. I'm a runner and cross-country skier, and I push my body so hard in those sports. I run on swollen joints and pulled muscles. I do hill workouts when I have a fever. I no longer trust my body to tell me if it's hungry or tired or sick. I lose a lot of weight when I go to college, so much that my family intervenes, and I have to spend the summer after my freshman year in an eating disorders program that I not so lovingly refer to as anorexia camp. It's the worst camp in the whole wide world. I was in the adult camp, which in some ways is good because I didn't have to be with whiny 13-year-olds. But I was in the adult camp, which meant that I had some old women in the group with me, really old, 40 or even 50. We eat our meals in the program. The room we eat in smells like fake maple syrup. A chipper therapist tries to carry on a conversation while me and the other skinny campers panic trying to figure out how we'll eat the big mounds of unappetizing food sitting in front of us on thick plastic plates. We all sort of hate the counselor because she's skinny and cute, but she doesn't have to eat 5 pancakes and 3 scrambled eggs every morning. She just sips her black coffee and chit-chats and acts like she has no problems in the world. A woman named Kelly always sits kitty corner from me. Kelly's in her 40s. She's missing a lot of teeth and has incredibly thin hair. She's so skinny, I can see all the dents and crevices in her skull and facial bones. She waves around her fork and sasses back at the therapist. At break, she chain smokes and teaches all of us how to smear the butter we're served with every meal under the table so we don't have to eat it. I don't fit in. I want to be a good student, like I've always been a good student. And I definitely don't want to be old and fucked up like Kelly. But I don't really know how to get better. The things they teach me just don't seem to work. I gained enough weight to go back to college thanks to all the pancakes, but I remain divorced from my body. My physical self is not my real self at all. And then I go to medical school, and immediately we start learning about the human body. Like, how did I not know that was going to happen? At first, it seems really abstract. There's like diagrams and cartoons of cells and organs. But then I go into anatomy lab and I look out and there are bodies laid out. I look at the elderly woman laid out in front of me. These are bodies. And over the following weeks, we explore it all from the outside in. These are not empty boxes. Inside, I see nerves branching like rivers and muscles tracking in beautiful bundles. I think of these things inside of me. And then we move into the clinical realm, and for the first time in my life, I see dozens of real bodies, bodies of all shapes and sizes and ages, bodies with all different diseases, bodies with all different stories. And of course, I know my patients are alive, but I am somehow struck by the power of that aliveness, even in the state of sickness. My patient's skin feels warm under my hands, and I can hear their hearts beating in my ears. I can't help but feel my own ribs expand as I take a deep breath. And then as I move along in my training, something happens. I start to pay attention to how often things are normal, even in my sickest patients. Like imagine you order labs, and you look through your labs and you're immediately drawn to the ones that are highlighted or the ones in red. But did you ever take the time to stop and look at all the numbers that land just in that little range where they're supposed to be? Or you order a CT scan and you immediately scroll to the part that's messed up. But did you ever look slowly down here and see, oh, the colon, it's going up and across and down, and the bladder's right there, and the abdominal wall is holding it all in. And then I get to thinking about all the people walking around in the world with their toenails growing and their guts digesting and their eyelids blinking. And I think about my own body and how it stuck with me through the punishment I doled out, how it conserved energy when I fed it too little, formed perfect scabs when I cut it, healed broken bones, torn ligaments. And then I find I'm at this weird intersection where the loathing that I've had for my body for so many years has come face to face with the realization that my body may actually be a miracle, that all bodies may actually be miracles. And finally, I start to heal. It's been well over a decade, and I can now say that my relationship with my body is in a much better place than it was during those hard years. That doesn't mean I love my body every day. There are definitely days I look in the shower and I'm like, oh God, what's going on down there? But then I remember that these little lopsided boobs fed 3 kids, and these legs bike me to work, and these fingers type ridiculously long clinic notes. And when my Sail J. Crew suit arrives and I quickly put it on and look in the mirror and I'm like, oh gosh, you do not look like the online model. I take my hands, I put them on the Lycra, and I think about my blood and guts doing their everyday miraculous things under them. And I care a whole lot less about my lack of cleavage.
I am sitting here with Dr. Meghan Rothenberger. Meghan, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Actually, this is your second time on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back.
So, Meghan, this is the second story that you've shared on the stage, and I have to say, each time you're getting better and better. Do you have like a theater career blossoming in the future?
Oh my gosh, definitely not. I feel like so sick when I think about getting up on a stage. So I like the storytelling part, but maybe not the performance part.
Well, you have a knack for it.
Well, thank you.
Let's dive into the story. I love this story. As usual, in true Meghan style, it manages to be both hilarious and thought-provoking. And I was wondering if you could start with this kind of awkward time of adolescence. You give us a couple of stories about that, the person shouting at you on the ski lift and the friend, showing you the training bra like it's kind of a secret. And just tell us more about that awkward time. And specifically, I'm curious, we talk a lot about how women are portrayed in the media, like on TV and in magazines, and also just kind of subliminal messages that we get as young girls in the world. And I'm wondering, if you remember seeing any of that stuff and if that informed the way that you experienced pre-puberty and puberty, or if you don't remember experiencing any of that. The reason I ask is I personally can't think of concrete examples. I mean, I'm sure it was in the water, but anyway, I wonder if that was your experience too.
Yeah. It's funny because I've thought about this a lot. And now watching my children go through adolescence, it brings back some of the feelings that I had during adolescence, which was just sort of a deep feeling of being unsure and unsettled. And where I got the cues around my body issues, it's not really clear to me. It's funny because I think when I went into treatment, you're sort of given ideas as to where this may have come from. And part of me, I wonder, did I rewrite my history to say oh yeah, it was the 90s, being super skinny was the thing. And certainly I looked around and saw images of really, really thin women. I mean, you think of Kate Moss, the heroin chic look that was everywhere. But I don't know if it was quite that direct. I think for me, it was more of a sense of a complete lack of trust or understanding of my own body and what was happening to my body and how it was different than I had envisioned it to be. But I can't pin it on sort of media in particular. But of course, we're all bathed in it all the time. So I'm sure it had something to do with it.
What about expectations? I know there are some girls who grow up and they get their first period and they have no idea what a period is. There are other girls who grow up and their parents have been reading them books forever and they're kind of hyper-educated on the topic. What was your experience? Were you prepared for the changes of puberty? Did you have any cheesy
God. I mean,
puberty books?
No, I was so unprepared. I mean, and my parents did a wonderful job raising us. I'm one of 3 girls. But I was raised Catholic and, my mom was raised Catholic. And I think there was a lot of taboo around anything having to do with sex at all. And so I really didn't get a lot of education about it. I had a friend, it's funny because I can picture her in my head. Her name was Heidi. And she had this sex book at her house. And so when I was in probably 4th or 5th grade, I loved going to Heidi's house because we could look through this book. And it was stuff that I really wasn't exposed to. So I think, yeah, my lack of education and just sort of concrete guidance around adolescence and puberty made it particularly hard for me.
There's a line in your story that stood out, which was, I start restricting my eating when I'm around 15. I don't really know why. It just feels sort of good to starve my disappointing body a little. And I was wondering if you could dig into that for us, even if you don't know exactly why you started restricting. What was people talk a lot about control, with restrictive eating. And did that feel like a way to take control or maybe bring us into that experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was in many ways about control and feeling like that's one of the few things you can control about your body. You can't control how tall you get. You can't control a lot of things about your body, but how much food you put into it, you can. So there was definitely that. And then there really was this sort of, it makes me so sad to think about now, but there was this sort of sense of like, I hate this body. And so, you don't treat things you hate very well. And that was a clear way of kind of punishing my body. Despite the fact that, it was working so hard for me, it's just a little heartbreaking when I think about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a really common experience that so many young women have gone through. This feeling of I hate my body, is it like I'm fat, or is it more like it feels foreign, I don't understand it, or is it like people look at me in a way that I don't want to be looked at, or like what exactly was underneath that? Because I feel like sometimes we think it's about like, oh, I'm fat, that kind of stuff, but I imagine it's a little bit more complicated than that. But
yeah, and I never even, like, as I was going into adolescence, I never really had a period of time when I was overweight at all. And it wasn't even about people telling me that I was overweight or comparing my weight. I think it was more about it just didn't look the way I wanted it to look. And I know that doesn't make sense. Like, there's not a direct, like, you starve yourself and then you get bigger boobs. Like, that's not, like, it doesn't work that way. But somehow in my mind, like, it was this sense of like, my body is wrong and I'm doing something to my body, whether it's, to punish it or just in some misguided way of thinking like I can turn it into a body that I want.
Was there ever a moment when you realized that your relationship with food and restriction had gone beyond what you originally intended?
I think the time when it really hit me was when I had come back from my freshman year in college, because I had really abnormal and restrictive eating patterns like all through high school. But I think because I was, living at home and I was eating meals with my family, I didn't lose a ton of weight. And then I went to college and I was completely on my own, making my own choices about what I ate and when I ate, and lost a lot of weight that year. And so when I came home, it was, I think, I didn't see it in myself. I had no concept of what my body really looked like, but I could see it in all my friends and family when they would see me. And that was hard.
You could see that they were concerned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in the story, you talk about your family staging an intervention of sorts, and then you end up at this place you jokingly refer to as anorexia camp. Tell us about the intervention, and then tell us about anorexia camp.
It's funny that my memories of the intervention are a little foggy. Like, I don't know how much is right or not. For some reason, I feel like we were in a bedroom at my parents' house. I don't think we probably were, but in my mind, I'm sitting on the floor of a bedroom. I have no idea if that's true or not. But I think it was my sisters and my parents just saying, we need to do something about this. Like, we're really worried. You're sick and you need some help. And then the program was so interesting. Again, like, I don't want to say like, oh, it was the wrong thing for me, because it was what was available. But wow, it was a weird experience, and, took away, if control was part of the problem, like, they really stripped away all control. Like, you walked in there and you had to get weighed in the morning, and, they'd say you can't drink anything before you come in. You have to wear like clothes that aren't bulky, heavy. And then they would just, like, we'd get to kind of pick what kind of food we wanted, but it was a huge quantity of food and you were just supposed to kind of sit there and eat it. It was an experience sort of unlike anything I've ever done before, in that you kind of felt like you were part of this team of people that were all in this sort of similar situation, but I felt like I had nothing in common with them, if that makes sense. Like, here we are all together, and clearly we have some of this, we must have the same problem because we're all here together. But I was like, who are these people? Like, I'm not like these people. It was really kind of weird, and even more unsettling, I think, than, the whole, just finding myself in that situation was actually what the program felt like on a day-to-day basis.
And this was a residential program?
No, I got to go home at night, which was nice.
So they would present food and have you sit there and monitor the group as they ate. Was there other programming? Was there individual therapy or group therapy or anything like that?
Yep, there was both. So I had an individual therapist. There was a nutritionist, I think, that we met with. And then we did a lot of group work, too. It was funny because when I was at my parents' house, I found this notebook. I found this box of stuff from like that summer. And there was this notebook that like, I don't even remember this, but I had to like write a letter like, "Dear anorexia." And it was like the most awful thing. Like I started to read it and I was like, oh God, I gotta stop right now. It was like terrible. So clearly it was like one of those exercises, like write a letter to your anorexia and tell it what you think it needs to hear. So there was a lot of that. And then there was like a little bit of movement, like we did some yoga and stuff. And I remember people would like, because you couldn't otherwise exercise, people would like do the most strenuous yoga they possibly could. I don't just feel like I have to move my body. I have to burn some calories. Like it was kind of a funny scene.
You mentioned feeling like you didn't have a whole lot in common with the other people in the program, aside from having an eating disorder. You also mentioned age difference, that there were some women in the program who were quite a bit older than you were at the time. Did everybody more or less keep to themselves, or were there friendships formed, or what was the social element of the program?
Yeah, it seemed maybe like a little like cliquey, like there were a couple groups of women that sort of seemed to bond. And I didn't really bond with any of them. There was one kind of younger woman that I did kind of spend most of my time with, and she was just really, really quiet. But there were some of the women that were like pretty tough. Like, they would kind of yell sass back at the facilitators. And, they were the ones that knew all the tricks for how to get around like the weigh-ins and eating all the food. And they would go out and just smoke like crazy. And so it wasn't like I didn't experience any sense of like sort of social support, I think, from the group. And probably because I was sort of in that weird in-between stage. Like most of the women in the group had been struggling with eating disorders, in many cases for over a decade. But then I would look at the adolescent group and they just seemed like little children. So I was sort of stuck, I think, in the middle.
Did you find the program to be helpful or effective or not?
It's a good question. I mean, I think one thing that stands out, two things something else just came into my mind. So one thing that was really good about it is it did, because you were forced to eat some foods. Like I had restricted to the point that there were certain foods that I just didn't feel like I could put in my body, and they made you do that. And in some ways, like that exposure therapy made it a little less scary, I think, to kind of broaden as I went further along in my life, to be like, okay, I can eat this stuff and it's okay. I mean, it feels silly that like, yeah, you could be deathly afraid of butter, but that's where my brain was for a while. So it helped me get over that. And then one thing and it's funny now that I think about it, but one thing that really stuck with me that I found weirdly helpful is that we learned sort of the science behind starvation. And they had us read about the Minnesota starvation study, where they took conscientious objectors from the war and then basically starved them and then studied what happened to them. And I remember a lot about that. And that was like really helpful for me in the longer term. I think at the time it sort of was like, yeah, it messes up everything. But in the longer term, it was helpful to reflect on that and how, when I was sort of in that state, things weren't working right in my brain. And, the reason why some things sort of went off the rails was, I think, in great part because my body was sort of starving, and being able to look back at that study and think like, okay, I do understand that now. So that was helpful.
Did you know that you wanted to go into medicine at that time?
I was thinking about it, but I think I hadn't committed at all. I was actually more interested in being a veterinarian. Which is kind of funny because infectious disease, maybe a little bit like the animal connections are there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's funny now thinking back and be like, oh yeah, the medical part of it was the part that stuck with me the most.
Yeah, that is striking. Do you remember anything in particular from the Minnesota starvation study or any of the medical pieces, like, these are the impacts of starvation on the body, and then thinking, was it like fear? Like, oh, I don't want that to happen to me? Or was it more like fascination? Or
it was more fascination, like, like when I was in high school, I started getting like subscriptions to like so many cooking magazines, which, was weird. Like, you don't eat any of the things in the cooking magazines. Why am but I would get these cooking magazines and I would just like pore over these cooking magazines. And in the starvation study, they found that a lot of the men just became like very obsessed with food, thinking about food all the time, like reading about food. And that was definitely like, I spent so much of my brain waves focused on food. And so, yeah, that was really striking to me. It was like, oh, that's like a biological chemical thing. It's fascinating.
So how did you get from there to medical school?
So I went back to school. I went to Colorado College, so I went back. I had planned on taking some summer school courses so that I could get, all of the requirements I needed. I missed that, so I ended up having to, after I graduated, I moved to Boulder and then just took some time off and took some courses so that I could take the MCAT. That was a real growth year for me. Like, for the first time, I wasn't like studying all the time. I spent a lot of time in nature, sort of thinking about things. And I still was not healthy in any way, but I think that was when I started to sort of feel like maybe a little more comfortable with myself. And then ended up going to med school after that.
And in your story, it sounds like there's a lot of healing that didn't quite begin until you were in med school. Like, there was something about turning the body into the object of study that actually was healing for you. Wondering if you can walk us through that a little.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like learning about that starvation study. Like, there's something like, wait, like that's not just like those individuals' experience. Like this is me too. This is like my brain, my body, my organs. And that's a weird thing to be reading about something that you have been carrying around with you your whole life without really even thinking about it. I think when I went to med school, I don't think I even knew like what a spleen was, when you start reading about it, you're like, holy shit, that thing's been in there the whole time. Like, it's kind of amazing. And so, I think kind of as I started to learn more about the amazing steps that happen inside of our bodies just to keep us going every day, I sort of started to shift a little bit in how I thought about my body. And it was definitely gradual. It wasn't like someday I was like, oh my God, like this is amazing. It was just this slow sort of recognition of like, oh, well, I didn't realize that. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a part of your story where you say, when we get labs back, we focus on the handful of labs that are abnormal, but we don't think about how much goes right every day, that it's a miracle that people don't just get illness every day from something going wrong. People live a long time, and homeostasis is amazing, and the way the organs communicate with each other to maintain that homeostasis is amazing. Was there a spiritual component to this new reverence that you had for the body, or did it feel more science-based? Or
I'm not a religious person in any way, but it did feel more spiritual than scientific, I think. And nature has always been really important to me. Animals have always been really important to me. And I've always loved just watching animals and how they move. And then you realize like, oh, I'm an animal too. I think that was sort of that weird, like, oh, like I do sort of belong. Like I have the same, blood coursing through my veins that little squirrel does running up that tree. And it is sort of this weird sense of like, from a body perspective, belonging as a creature of the earth,
Was it anatomy lab that catalyzed this, or was it more like cardiology, hepatology, like learning about the organ systems? Like, was it more cognitive, or was it more like, oh, I'm cutting into this cadaver and look how amazing this is? Or was it both?
Anatomy was an interesting experience. It felt, God, this sounds terrible. It felt very dead to me. Yeah. Like, you see the stuff, but it's kind of feels not like it was a living, breathing person. And so I think it really wasn't until I started like actually taking care of patients and like realizing like you start looking at scans and you start like listening to people's hearts and feeling their organs. And that's when it sort of was like, this is a living, breathing person with all of this stuff happening inside of them.
Where do you think you got your love of nature and animals? Because it seems like taking that natural love that you have and sort of expanding it to include yourself and your own body is one of the main ways that you found healing. But that initial gravitation toward animals, for example, I have someone in my family who loves animals, and I think a panda bear is cute and I'll pet a dog, but like he loves animals. He really loves animals. And there are just some people out there who have that passion, and I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think I was just born that way. It's kind of funny and my sisters, they like animals a lot too, but I don't think they have it the same way I did from like when I was just a little kid. And I look at my own children. I always thought I'd have like a child that loved animals so I could buy like 1 million pets, but they're not really into it, which makes me so sad. But yeah, growing up, I mean, I just begged and begged and begged every kind of animal I could have. I had like snakes and hermit crabs and hamsters, and we had a couple dogs and a rabbit, like whatever I could talk my parents into getting me, I would try. And I spent a lot of time, like I'd go to the Humane Society or I'd go up to the really awful strip mall pet store and just like gaze at all the animals longingly, So yeah, from the time I was little, it was just kind of part of who I am.
So was there a point in med school or later where you felt a little bit more of a concrete shift toward healing? Like, I know you said it wasn't sudden, that it was gradual, but was there a moment or a season of life where you realized, like, I think I'm in a better place with my eating disorder?
Yeah, I think pregnancy was like a big shift for me. I mean, that's sort of a breathtaking thing to look at your children and be like, oh my God, I grew that child in me.
I made that eyeball in my uterus.
I made that. Like that happened inside. It's like kind of amazing. And I was really lucky. I was able to breastfeed. And so like the food that I was putting in my mouth was no longer just to nourish me, but to nourish my child. I think it's really hard to think about your body in the same way once you've grown a child and fed a child and realized what your body is capable of.
Do you think of your eating disorder as something that went away or is cured, or is it something you live with and that you manage, where it flares up from time to time and you deal with the flares and it's always there? Or do you feel like you've moved past it?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say like, oh, I'm totally cured. But it is funny because I do find at times when I'm most stressed or I feel like life is really chaotic, sometimes those old thoughts randomly come back. And I'm very aware of it now. I can listen for them, and I have to like consciously say like, nope, that isn't helpful anymore. But it's interesting how like relatively recently I got like a terrible like GI illness. So I didn't eat for a couple of days. And there was this weird sense of like, I haven't eaten for like 48 hours. Maybe I should see if I can't eat for 72 hours. Like, isn't that fucked up? Like after this many years where I was like, wait, no, wrong answer. Like the right answer is like, no, your poor body needs nourishment. Like take care of it. But it's weird that that's still there and it comes almost automatically. So yeah, it makes me feel like I'm not proud of that, but at least I can turn it around really quick and hear those voices like pretty clearly and know that the warnings of when like, oh, nope, I got to pay attention.
In the culture these days, we hear a lot about body positivity or body acceptance or body love. There's all these different terms, and we see people speaking up about this more with, in commercials or fashion shows. Like we're seeing a little bit more variety in body types. I'm wondering how you see that movement. Like, does that resonate with you? Does that feel connected to or different from your journey and your experience? And do you find that stuff to be effective, or do you have different ways of thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you can see all different body types, and it makes me so happy for particularly my daughter that, you can look around and see women who are proud of their bodies regardless of their shape or size. And so I do think that is such a good thing. I mean, just the visualization, being able to see it around you. I have a weird hesitancy to talk about anything related to weight. It's an area that I struggle with. When people kind of talk about veganism, I kind of just back out because I can't have those conversations in a way that doesn't feel like it. I'm somehow biased or not able to have kind of healthy conversations around those things, dieting or extreme exercising. People kind of want to talk about those things often. What do you think about this diet or that diet? Or I just kind of can't. I don't know if I'll ever get over that. So that's been a little bit of a challenge for me. And even with my patients too, when trying to counsel patients about dietary choices and everything else, it hits a sort of nerve for me, and it can be really tough.
Yeah, we did a series on the emotion of shame in medicine, and we had this amazing story from I think she was a dietitian or nutritionist, and her job is to counsel people with diabetes about their diabetes and nutrition and their weight. And she said in the story that a lot of her patients are addicted to food and have unhealthy relationships with food in the other direction, where they overeat, for example. And she said that even though her issue is the inside out version of that, to restrict, that in her mind, they were sort of two sides of the same coin. And she felt like she had a lot of empathy for her patients and understood them in a way that maybe she wouldn't otherwise. For example, she said something in her story about I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and feel how am I going to be around food today? And she doesn't disclose her anorexia to her patients because she feels like that's not helpful. But she says that it gives her a unique insight into the challenges that they may be dealing with. And so I'm wondering if that's something you've ever experienced when you're talking to patients, even if you don't disclose your personal story, if you find that it's a way in to understand things in a different way.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think not as much around food, but around addiction and other mental health struggles. Because I think I do understand to some extent, what it can feel like to practice pretty self-destructive behaviors when you can rationally say that's not good for you, but you still do it. And so I think that just basic understanding of human behavior can be really helpful when talking to patients.
You mentioned your daughter. Given your experience, how are you thinking about bringing up your daughter in this world and talking to her about these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when she was 2, I was we're going to sail through puberty because I'm going to be so open and we're going to have books and resources. But it's tough. It's embarrassing as a kid. But I try really hard just to be open and available to talk about things. I bring up stuff, just in front of her that, I'll chat with my husband about things just so she can hear. These are normal conversations to have. I mean, it's funny. I think back to just remember this. This is embarrassing. But when I was probably 10 or maybe 11, I remember looking at the newspaper, our local newspaper, and there was a headline that said most couples practice fidelity. And I took that article because I didn't know what fidelity meant. I thought it was something having to do with sex. I was fidelity, is that a position? What is that? And so it's so funny because I was so, I had no idea, and I don't think my parents knew that I was that completely clueless. But, so I think that's part of it too, is just giving your children the language to use. And you don't need to talk about sex all the time, but I think just what are the things they're going to hear at school? What are the things they're going to hear and not understand and be curious about? And, I would so much rather that they come talk to me rather than Google it. I would have Googled fidelity and then I would have been really, really disappointed. But yeah, so I think trying to be open and make things as
shameless as possible. I think shame is such a big part of adolescence, and feeling weird and trying to normalize things and recognize that, like, you may think this is weird, but this isn't weird at all. Like, I wish someone could have just said that to me. You're not weird. Like, it's totally fine. You're not weird.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about your story from the stage or your story in general?
The one thing I guess that I would say is it was really nice after how many people, both men and women, had said that it resonated with them, that they too have struggled with, issues around their body, the challenges of adolescence, eating disorders. And I feel like that is so good for me to hear that, clearly I'm not alone. And I think we forget the struggles that so many people around us face.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing the story. I know that it connected with a lot of people in the audience and will with a lot of the people listening today. So thank you, Meghan, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
This episode of The Nocturnists was produced by me and producer and head of story development, Molly Rose Williams. Our executive producer is Allie Block, and Ashley Pettit is our program director. Original theme music was composed by Yosef Monroe, and additional music comes from Blue Dot Sessions. The Nocturnist is made possible by the California Medical Association, a physician-led organization that works to ensure the doctor-patient relationship remains at the center of medicine. To learn more about the CMA, visit cmadocs.org. This episode of the Nocturnist Conversations is sponsored by the Physicians Foundation, which supports physician well-being, practice sustainability, and leadership in delivering high-quality, cost-efficient care. The Nocturnist is also made possible by donations from listeners like you. In fact, we recently moved over to Substack, which makes it easier than ever to support our work directly. By joining us with a donation of $2, $5, or $10 a month, you'll become an essential part of our creative community. I'm your host, Emily Silverman. See you next week.